Hey folks, Andrew here. Welcome back to the show. I'm really excited for you to be here. As always, I feel like I say that every time. Just excited to have you guys listening in again or watching, depending whether you're on a podcast or with us on YouTube. I really appreciate all the love you've been giving us. Make sure to subscribe. That way you always get every single update for the show as soon as it comes out. And if you're trying to learn a bit more about house hacking, we're going to put in the show notes and description our house hacking ultimate guide, or we'll do the quick link for it is fibrei.com/HH guide. Absolutely free, 4,000 word in-depth ultimate guide to house hacking. That way, if you want to brush up on your house hacking skills, or if you're new and want to learn the ins and outs to house hacking, it's there for you as a resource. Now, for today's guest, we've got Robert Leonard. And let me tell you, he started off buying his first property at 20 years old. Now at 25, he's got half a dozen deals under his belt while working full time. And he's also the host of 2 podcasts, Millennial Investing and a real estate investing show. So he's just a really great guy. And I really like his approach to looking at a metro area or a geographic area, and also some of his thoughts on using an LLC to buy a property or not. So I wanted to have him on to sort of talk a bit about that house hacking experience, and then also just to have him share a bit more about everything else that he's working on. That way you'll get some great takeaways and some best practices. And I just think I need to stop talking at this point, and let's go ahead and bring him on. Robert, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I'm excited to chat with you a bit about your house hacking experience and where you're headed with your real estate investing career. But before we dive in, how are you doing today and where are you calling in from?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here, share my story, and provide as much value as I can. I'm calling in from the greater Boston area.
Right on. So let's really just sort of get started with, give us a high level overview of your house hacking experience. How old were you? What type of house hack did you do? And then we'll really dig into the nitty gritty after that.
So I was 20 years old when I did my first house hack, and it was a condo.
Awesome. And was that there in Boston?
So greater Boston area. It was out in central Mass actually, but I was commuting into the Boston area for work. So yeah, it was local enough.
Awesome. Well, as someone that bought their first property at 20, I think that's awesome that you did it as well. I mean, so what caused you at 20 to say like, all right, I'm going to go ahead and buy a condo? And, was house hacking really defined at this point, or how long ago actually was that?
So that was 5 years ago because I'm 25 today. No, house hacking was not on my radar. I had no idea what I was doing at the time. I had no idea that it was even a strategy. I don't know if Brandon Turner had even coined it as house hacking at that time yet, but basically how it came about was that going into college, my freshman year, my parents told me that when I graduated college and I started earning a salary, that I would have to start paying them rent if I lived at their house. I felt this was completely reasonable. It was, a reasonable request. It was just not something that I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I was actually a loan officer at the time at a bank. So that's how I paid my way through college. So I had an understanding of credit and how financing worked. So I said, I'm going to challenge myself to buy a house by the time I graduate college so I don't have to pay my parents any rent. And I told them that, and I told some of my friends, and of course everybody said I was crazy and said that that wasn't possible to do at 20. And so not only did I want to do it myself, but that also lit a fire under me and got me even more excited for it. So fast forward 4 years, I saved up as much money as I could, and I was able to get a conventional 5% down loan. Just so happened that it was a condo. I wasn't necessarily looking for a condo, but I just really liked this condo. I liked the area. It worked well with my work. Down payment was good. I could afford it. And I had no interest in even house hacking it. I was just going to live there.
Yeah.
And then I lived there for a few months, and maybe 2 months or so, 3 months. And I realized that there was a second bedroom that I just walked by every day, and I never even opened the door since I moved in.
Yeah.
So I said, well, I should probably do something with that. And so I was like, well, let's see what I can rent it out for. And I ended up renting it out, and that's how my house hack was born.
Awesome. All right. So you bought it 5 years ago. What was the purchase price on the condo?
It was about 130, 135.
So pretty reasonable.
Yeah, it was absolutely reasonable.
And do you remember roughly what your payment was, principal, interest,
$1,100
tax,
total with the HOA fee.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, that was going to be one of my other questions is, did you actually get an understanding of what an HOA was at that time? Or was it just when you were working with your realtor, it said, oh, by the way, you got to pay this fee every month and it sort of covers the cost?
I knew going into it when I started looking at mortgage, because I knew how they were going to calculate what I could qualify for my mortgage. And I knew that they were going to take into consideration the HOA. So you could technically not buy as expensive of a condo usually as you could buy of a single family house. So I knew that I had to adjust my price points depending on the type of property I was looking at.
Awesome. And then, you know, did you actually know a bit about analyzing an HOA and looking at the reserves that the HOA has and if there's any deferred capital expenses coming up? Or was this still just, I remember when I was a loan officer, we always had to fill out those sheets for the underwriters or the loan processor request it from the HOA. Had you gotten far enough in your career where you had seen those yet? Or is this something that sort of came along later?
No, so I was a loan officer, but for consumer debt. So I was
Okay.
not doing mortgages. I was just doing credit cards, auto loans, personal loans, things like that. So I didn't see it in my professional career, if you will. And I was not familiar with these types of concepts when I was buying the property. However, when I was getting the loan, the bank did ask a lot about that. They did ask for a lot of documentation from the HOA. So I knew it was important and I knew that they were looking at that because they were not all, and it basically was explained to me that they weren't just underwriting me, they were also underwriting the association because
Yeah.
that impacts the collateral of their loan, things like that. And funny enough, this property actually took a while to close because there was a special assessment going on, which
Mhm.
means they're adding or they're doing some sort of project. It doesn't necessarily mean they're adding to the HOA, but they're doing some sort of project. For me, I thankfully got the process started early, so it didn't really matter to me. I wasn't in a rush. My parents weren't kicking me out. So I was able to just kind of wait. And the HOA took a couple months to figure out exactly what they were doing, get all their documentation in line. So it took me a while before the bank would lend on this property. And I kind of took a risk. I knew, you didn't know what that was going to be. They could have jacked up the HOA fee. They could have done, whatever they ended up doing. And we can talk about the details of how it ended up working out. But that was a component of the HOA that was actually at play on this
Yeah.
property as well.
Yeah. So what for folks who are listening haven't dealt with that. So an HOA, and this is why, condos and townhouses can sometimes get a really bad rep as investment properties. You just need to make sure you analyze it and work it in your number. But what will happen is an HOA will be managed badly, either by the management company or a bad board. And then what ends up happening is they realize, hey, there's something big we're supposed to cover, like roofs or siding, and it has to be done now. We don't have enough reserves in our capital account. So now all of a sudden we're short, 10 grand, 50 grand, 100 grand. We're going to assess everyone to get that caught up and to be able to do that work. And then what also he was referring to and just touched on briefly is what happens a lot of time then is they also come back and increase the HOA fees every month to help get the HOA back on solid footing. So that was awesome that you were able to sort of wait, let that all get done, and then be able to close on the property. So you're in your $1,100 a month, including the HOA. What'd you end up renting the second bedroom for?
So I just want to say that that is with the increased HOA actually. So it ended up, well, we could talk a bit more about that too, but that was with the final increased HOA. But so I ended up renting it for about $750 for the bedroom.
That's pretty awesome. I mean, so your housing costs are pretty cheap here. I mean, you're 350 a month for having your own place. You'll would hopefully get some appreciation. You're getting equity pay down, all of that good stuff on this. So, did it click right away? I mean, I remember you said you were walking by that bedroom, weren't even going in. You're like, oh, let me rent this out. And then was it like, cool, I got this extra money per month, or did it really start to click in and it's like, oh wow, I'm living super cheap?
So it was a little bit of both. I was only 20 at the time, so I was not as smart with my money as I should have been. I knew that I was living for 350 bucks, so I had a lot of disposable income and I didn't necessarily use that in the smartest way. Knowing if I could do it again today, I would do it very differently.
Most
I
of
went
us
out.
don't at 20, right?
Yeah, but I was 20. I knew better, but I still did it anyway. So I went out and I bought a very nice BMW convertible and I bought a jet ski and I bought all kinds of toys. And so I wasn't necessarily great with that, but I did know that I was living for cheap and I knew I was doing something good. So that was great. Living in the property was great. He actually worked nights. I worked days, so I never saw him. It was literally like I lived alone. So it was great, but I didn't even think it was real estate investing. I just was thinking like, hey, I'm getting a little bit extra cash here every month. It's, not really a big deal. And I didn't really think of it until months and months later.
Gotcha. And then, during this period of time when you have them living, did you do a lease with them? I mean, how are you doing rent? Did you even know about things like Cozy and Stessa and Buildium, or is it like, hey, rent's coming up, give me a check or give me a pocket full of cash?
No, so I didn't know about Cozy, Stessa, anything like that. I knew I was supposed to give him a lease, and I did. I gave him a lease. He never signed it, but he always paid his rent. He just left the cash on the counter for me every month, and that was pretty much it. I mean, he was a couple days late here and there, but it really wasn't a big deal. And I bought the property without the expectation of renting it out, so
Yeah.
I kind of just was ready to pay the mortgage anyway. And so no, we didn't. And today I would never do this again. I would have a formal lease in place, and I would use all these other different tools that we have. But at the time, I didn't know any better. I didn't know I was even a real estate investor at the point. So no, there was nothing formal whatsoever.
Awesome. All right. So how long was it before you were in there and things started clicking? And then you said, all right, maybe I made a mistake buying the jet ski and the BMW and blowing the money and not investing it, and started to think more, or I guess sort of broader about real estate investing as a whole.
It was about a year later, maybe 9 months or so, when I went to sell the property. And that's when my life changed a little bit. I had some circumstances that changed. So it just kind of clicked then. I was like, started to research it a little bit. I said to myself, I said, somebody else has to have done this before. I can't be the first person that's ever done this. And so sure enough, I did a little bit of research, come up on, all these other people doing it. And then you start studying more in bigger pockets. You start hearing about all these normal mom and pops people, just like you and I, that are buying rental properties. And that amazed me because I had always been into investing, but I was always in stock investing. At this point, I had studied stock investing for about 5 or 6 years. And I always thought that was going to be my way to wealth.
Yeah.
I never thought that, me 20 could be a real estate investor. I thought you had to be a millionaire to invest in real estate. But when I started looking up for people who were doing this strategy already, I found people that were doing rentals. And I said, well, I could do that. They're no different than me. They're no better than me. I can do this. And so that's when I really dove in. I started to really study the content, the material, and went on to do a live-in flip, which I currently live in still. And then, buying some rentals here and there as well. So that's really when it clicked for me, was not till I was actually going to sell the property.
Yeah. All right. So you sold it really at the year mark. I mean, how'd you end up doing from what you bought it for and what you sold it? Had the market appreciated some? Or, one of the folks I hear a lot is, you're not going to really get appreciation in condos. So, I mean, how did it end up working out for you? The fact that you bought it, had closing costs, sold it in a period of a year, had selling costs on the back end as well?
It was slightly less than a year. I think I was maybe there 9 or 10 months. But yeah, actually I was able to get a lot of appreciation. And this goes back to the special assessment. I kind of speculated a little bit. I got a little bit lucky, but I knew something was going on. So I was willing to take the bet. And so basically what ended up happening was they did add a special assessment to the condo fee. They raised it from $250 a month or $200 a month to $350. So they raised it quite a bit. But what they did was they did a $7 million renovation to the whole complex. And it was a pretty big complex. We had like 150 units maybe. So there was a lot. And they put about, I want to say maybe 60,000 into each unit or something along those lines. And the unit owners only had to put $10,000 up. So they were able to save about $50,000 over the last 30 years per unit to put into these properties. So I had just moved there. So I hadn't put much into those reserves. So I essentially got almost $50,000 for free in terms of repairs. They put new windows, roofs, siding. They replaced our sliding doors. They did all the sidewalks, repaved everything, redid the pool, tennis courts, basketball courts, the whole nine. They redid everything. So not only was my unit nicer, but the whole complex was nicer. And so I was expecting to rent this property out when I wanted to move. But because of this, I decided to sell the property. I believe I ended up selling it for about 155, 160. So, it wasn't massive, from 130, 135 to 155, 160, but
in a year, right?
In a year, it's not
yeah,
bad.
Yeah.
In a year, it's not bad.
Awesome. So, I mean, it sounds like you just got some really good timing in there. So you left there. Did you go back home for a bit, or did you go right into the live and flip that you're in now?
I think I went back to my parents for maybe 5 or 6 months, and then I bought a live and flip that I'm in now.
And so did you specifically say like, all right, I'm back home with parents, or I'm looking for the new deal? Were you going to look for another house, or was it really like, I got to find a good deal? I need to make this a true investment versus buying a primary residence?
No, it was more primary residence, actually.
And then what made the property such like, how long did you end up looking for it? And then what made you say like, all right, this is the house that I want to buy?
So at the time, my girlfriend and I had gotten pregnant, so she was about to have our son, and so we were kind of forced. We needed to get into a property. We had to get out of my parents and go into a property. And so I pretty much told her, pick one of these few houses that we both enjoy, and I'll be happy with it. And I kind of tried to get this one because I could tell that in the area that it was in, if we just did a few small things, it would make the property value a lot more valuable. And so we were buying this property with the back, like no usable yard. It was not fenced in. There's some small cosmetic things on the inside. It needed some paint and a few other things here and there that were relatively small, landscaping. And because of that, the property was going for a lot less than other properties in the area because it's on two cul-de-sacs. And so there's a ton of families in the area. Almost everybody has kids. So you want a yard and all this. And so I said, I think we should buy this property because we can do X, Y, and Z and increase the value and while we live there. And it's not going to really impact our living situation. And so that's pretty much why we decided to buy this property.
Awesome. So you bought it because it had some upside on it. I mean, were you thinking you're only going to be here in short term, or was this, hey, we're going to buy it, we're going to be there for quite a while, and we like it because it has the upside, versus just saying like, hey, let's get in, do some work, and then change over in 2 or 3 years?
So we were thinking maybe 2, 3 years. So for us, that's kind of a long time, but
Yeah.
not super long either. And we did feel like it had a little bit more upside than something else. So
Awesome. So, that really sort of covers your house hacking, living in flip style. And, I wanted to touch on that briefly, but why I really wanted to have you on the show is to really dive in with, how you use that first experience with a condo and this one to leverage to now growing. You're up to what, 5 properties or 6?
I've done 6 deals.
6 deals. And now you also run 2 different podcasts, one on millennial investing and one on real estate investing. So, how did those first 2 deals really set you up to start to become a larger real estate investor?
The biggest thing was just the mindset. I had all these limiting beliefs that I didn't even really realize that I had. I just pushed real estate to the side. I knew a bit about investing. I was pretty well educated on personal finance. I was pretty financially literate, but I just didn't think I could be a real estate investor. And so that first deal really just opened my eyes. And I like to tell people that your first deal is not going to make you rich, but it will get you started to get rich. And so for me, that deal is not going to make me rich when you take into consideration how much I paid in interest and, a bunch of other closing costs and things like that you mentioned. I really didn't make a ton of money on that deal, but the mindset shift that it gave me is invaluable. And it's probably going to make me a ton of money over the rest of my life. I was able to learn that so early. So I think that was really the biggest thing. I don't think I would ever have started a real estate podcast or done all the different things that I've been doing in the real estate space without that mindset shift.
So now, how are you spending your money now that you make from real estate investing? Are you back to buying jet skis and BMWs, or where are you at with it?
I don't spend any of the real estate money. So I have a corporate job. So I just live off of that. I've never taken $1 from any of the real estate stuff. It stays entirely in the bank accounts for the real estate stuff.
And then one of the things I want to touch on, I've heard you talk about this before, and I just sort of really liked your perspective on it. Do you prefer to buy properties in your personal name or in LLCs? And what are some of like the pros and cons from your opinion on each of those?
So this is something that I've kind of flip-flopped on over the years, and there's a couple different things that I flip-flopped on. This is one of the big ones. And so when I first got into real estate investing, I had the idea that I would never buy a property if it wasn't in an LLC. I wanted that protection. And then you started to get into the actual nitty-gritty of buying a property, the actual logistics of buying a property. And you'll find that if you're buying a 1 to 4 unit property, this is going to be an arbitrary number, but a very high percentage, say 95% of banks won't lend to you in an LLC. So that makes finding funding, and competitive funding with low interest rates, good terms on your debt, that type of thing, extremely, extremely hard. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing was I said, okay, well, I'll buy it in my personal name and then I'll just quick claim it to an LLC and gain the protection that way. And then you have, at least for me, my rentals are mostly in Texas and I live in the greater Boston area. So I have to register as a foreign entity in Texas as well as where I live and where the business is technically based out of. And just the registration fees for the business alone almost took like 50% of the cash flow for one of the properties. And every property has its own LLC if you were going to do it that way. So it just didn't make a lot of sense for me. So I ended up transitioning, just keep everything in my personal name for now, and just make sure I have a good insurance policy that essentially replicates that protection that you get from an LLC. And it's been fine. I don't have any worries about it. Now, if I buy a 5-unit or more, I'll definitely do an LLC because you have no reason not to. You'll be getting commercial debt anyway, and they'll lend to LLCs. But if you're talking 1 to 4 units, I've actually gone away from using an LLC to just keeping it in my personal name.
Yeah, I know. And it's always funny when people are like, okay, I got my LLC set up. I'm ready to be a real estate investor. And I'm like, you don't have to do that. Like the cost to set it up, the annual reporting fee, in some states it's only a couple $100, but when you start to add all that up and like you have a property that's only going to cash flow like $2,000 a year after maintenance and CapEx and property management and including vacancy. And then you're paying 5, 6, 7, 8, 900, $1,000 for the accountant and for keeping everything up and running. You just eat through all your cash flow. And then the other part is people are like, well, I need asset protection. And it's like, you're only worth $10,000. Do you really need asset protection? Like, you can make sure you have adequate insurance and liability insurance for the property, and then a couple $100 to add a umbrella policy. And that works for most folks when you're buying that small multifamily. But I've heard you say that before. It's like, well, I thought this way and I sort of flip-flopped to the other way. And it's a really great way to look at it. So thanks for sharing that with us. And one of the things, one of the other things I really wanted to touch on with you is, you invest out of state. So you're doing house hacking. What drove you to say like, okay, I've been doing house hacking, but why not just keep investing in Boston, greater Boston area, Massachusetts? Why go look at Texas?
The reason was properties are just so expensive here. And I'm still relatively young. I didn't have enough money to necessarily buy a deal here. And I could have raised the money. I had some friends that would have gone in on a deal with me. I have a business partner that I invest a lot with, and he could have filled up some of the gaps that I had, and we could have raised the money. But the point was that a few different things. One, the return numbers were good, but we could find a lot better in other parts of the country. So our return numbers in Texas are way better than I could get here. And two, and this was the biggest thing, was the risk perspective or the risk component of it. And so for us, we had to put maybe $100,000, $125,000 down on a decent sized property here in the greater Boston area to get decent returns. So that's $100,000 at risk, plus closing costs, things like that. This property in Texas, well, some might consider it more risky because it's long distance. I actually saw it as less risky because my down payment was only $15,000. So I said, worst case scenario, this goes bad. I'm only out $15,000 versus $100,000. And so if this is going to be my first rental and it could possibly go bad, I'm going to go with the lower risk. And the other component of risk that I don't think a lot of people think of that I like to think of is the mortgage payment. So on that property up here, our mortgage payment would have been $2,500 to $3,000, maybe a little bit more. The rental property down in Texas, the mortgage is about $400 all in. So I said, worst case scenario, if I have to float this property for a little while, if I do everything wrong, I'm a horrible landlord, I can't find a tenant, the market stinks, all my analysis was wrong, I could float a $400 payment for, essentially as long as I need to get this asset stabilized, sell it, get a tenant in there, whatever I had to do to get it stabilized.
You could afford to fix problems at $400 a
at
month.
400, exactly.
$2,500, $3,000. Like, okay,
That's
maybe you can do it for a month or two, but then you start hurting really, really bad. Yeah,
exactly. So I saw that as a huge benefit that I think that significantly reduced the risk for me. And so I said, let's do it.
Awesome. So what are some of the tools that you use or the websites or resources to analyze investing out of state that are applicable for anyone in the US to say like, all right, I'm going to do a house hack in the city that I'm in or a nearby city. What are some great tools and resources that you use that those folks can say like, great, here's something I can use to research my own city and look at the data, job growth, things like that to decide if their local area is a good place to invest in?
So there's a website called city-data.org that'll have all of the data that you need to analyze markets. It'll give you, there's 5 or 6 main characteristics that I look at, and that'll give you 5 of them. And so you just kind of go through it and find all the demographic data points that you want until you find a good city. and then go from there.
So what are your 6 key points that you like to look at?
Population growth, income growth, house value growth, crime rate, where crime is trending. So is it going down or up over the last 10 years or 15 years or so? And then job growth.
Awesome. I mean, really, really great stuff. So, I mean, where are you going from here? I mean, you've got, you've done what, half a dozen deals now. Are you going to keep expanding? I mean, are you still investing outside of real estate? I mean, you said you had been studying, the stock market for quite a while. I mean, what's your broader personal finance plan for sort of the rest of your 20s and into your early 30s?
So I probably could have done more real estate deals. So I've offloaded some of them. So I only have 2 or 3 properties right now of the 6. And so I probably could have bought even more deals, but I do still invest a lot in the stock market. So probably maybe 50-50. So all of my corporate retirement money, that goes straight into the stock market, into my 401k. And that's what I do with that money. And then anything I save outside of that goes into real estate. So my ultimate goal is to build a portfolio of cash flowing rental properties that's able to replace my W-2 income. For the short term, I'm trying to buy 4 or 5 house hacks over the next 4 or 5 years. I'm trying to house hack until I'm 30. And I think if I can do that, I think I might be able to reach fire at that point. So, and I'm not going to sell those properties. I'm going to keep those as rentals. And so hopefully by then I could have up to 20 units, maybe 15 to 20 units, depending on how big the properties are. So I'm hoping to do that every year for the next 5 years. But that's kind of how I split my money. Corporate retirement money goes into stocks and the rest goes into real estate.
It's a cool way to sort of like think about it. Like I've got a little diversification. I'm both investing in real estate, but also in equities. And then I love the fact that you said, like, I'm trying to do 4 or 5 house hacks through my whole 20s. I'll put it in the show notes, but I wrote this cool article about this, what I called, someone else might have already named it, but the title of the article is like the house hacking leapfrog strategy, where if you look at a period of a decade and just say, can I go from house hack to house hack to house hack? It'll completely set your life up. Well, when you're done, you'll end up with 4 or 5 rental properties that you bought with very little money down, and you'll have great cash flow. You'll have built appreciation. You'll have had equity pay down. It's just a great way to set you up financially. So I love that. That's sort of your broader plan there. Well, Robert, I really appreciate you being on. I mean, sort of looking back through your past 5 years of experience, I mean, what are one of the things that if you could go back and change, would you have done differently?
I wouldn't have bought the BMW.
Yeah.
That has been my biggest financial mistake by far. Thankfully, it was a used BMW. I didn't go out and spend $50,000 on one. I spent like 10 grand. So it wasn't the end of the world, but I had to pay for it for a while, a few years, and it's probably been my biggest financial mistake. That's what I go back and do differently.
Awesome. And then what do you think your biggest success or win has been with your real estate investing so far, where you're like, if I could go back and replicate that, I would keep doing that?
The long distance rental, no doubt, hands down, that has been the biggest thing, because I think there's such an opportunity there for real estate investors. It's not as scary as people think. And if you can get it down, I think it just completely opens the world of real estate investing in a whole new way than just investing in your local market.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So before we let you go, we like to ask all of our guests a set of final 6 questions. Are you ready for them?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. Question number 1. What's your favorite personal finance related blog, book, or podcast?
My personal favorite personal finance resource would probably be a book, and it would probably be The Richest Man in Babylon. It just kind of really blows my mind as to when it was written and how applicable all of the points in the book are still today.
And we'll throw a link to that in the show notes for folks. All right. So on to question number 2. What's your favorite real estate related resource? So blog, book, or podcast?
I have to give a shout out to the Bigger Pockets podcast. That's the original Bigger Pockets podcast. That's my favorite. It's taught me so much. And, it's really taught me essentially everything I know today.
Awesome. All right. So question number 3, what's been your favorite travel destination so far? So either locally in the US or internationally around the world, any place, as long as it's been a travel destination that you've enjoyed.
Oh man, that's a hard one. I've traveled a lot. I've been to about 40 out of the 50 states, and I've been to a couple countries. So it's hard for me to choose, but I guess I would say my favorite has probably been London.
Awesome. And then what's next on your travel vacation list? Do you have anything planned during COVID, or are you going to sort of wait and see before you start traveling again?
Yeah, it's an interesting time to be asking that question. I really would. I actually just earned the Southwest Companion Pass, which,
Oh,
for those who aren't familiar, means that anytime I fly, somebody can fly with me for free. So it's essentially a buy one, get one free pass for Southwest for the next 2 years. So unfortunately, it's bad timing with COVID, but I'd really like to make it out to Hawaii. They're not accepting travelers at this time, so I won't be going out there for a bit. So I'm actually going to Myrtle Beach in about 2 or 3 weeks. So that'll be a small little trip. It's not a crazy trip. It's not too far here from the Boston area. So that's really all I have in the plans for travel. Hopefully end up in Hawaii not too long, and we'll see.
yeah, awesome. I know Myrtle Beach well because I grew up in North Carolina, but I'll put a link to this in the show notes. I've got a whole series that we wrote on credit card rewards and travel hacking and how it pairs really well with real estate investing. But it's such a cool way to, like, when you're going to go renovate a property, put it on that travel rewards card and rack up those points so you can go and do free trips. All right. So question number 5, what's the biggest bucket list item on your list that you haven't accomplished yet?
Time freedom, being able to do financial freedom essentially is really just the biggest thing on my bucket list. I want to be able to do exactly what I want to do every day indefinitely.
Awesome. And then the 6th and final question, what is your favorite life hack?
My favorite life hack is a journal that I created. It's called the Daily Time Log, and that has been my favorite. It's been super impactful. It's really changed my life.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your story with us. If people want to check you out, where can they find you?
2 best places to connect with me, just subscribe to either of the podcasts. One is called Millennial Investing. The other one is called Real Estate Investing. You can search those names and just look for my little cartoon in any of your favorite podcast players. You can go to theinvestorspodcast.com. And if you want to contact me directly, the best place is on Instagram. My username is TheRobertLeonard. I'm super active on there. I answer every single DM and hopefully provide a bunch of free content for you guys. So those are the 2 best places to find me.
Awesome. Thank you again for being on the show. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next podcast episode and new investing resources. What are your takeaways and thoughts about this discussion? Let us know in the comments section below.